Hi, everyone. Happy sort of start of summer, I think. At least it feels that way. And I hope everybody's well. You had a smaller packet this time, maybe no less dense, but hopefully it didn't feel overwhelming. And we'll get started as we normally do, a quick agenda review, and after I just check in with Tom and Amanda and ask if you had any opening remarks that you wanted to make today at all.
I don't. I'm all set.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Jody.
Okay. All right. So quick review of ground rules like we always do. We're starting and ending on time. We will be talking in a moment about the length of these meetings and how you all are feeling about the rest of the meetings and whether we should be extending those by an hour given the limited amount of time that we have remaining. Get your reactions about that. I'm presuming, and I feel confident at this point, that you're all coming prepared, having read all the materials in advance, that while you're here, you're with us completely and not multitasking. I'll be admitting Ryan here right now, so we've got him. That we're just paying attention to how much time we're taking up and encouraging others who we haven't heard from to weigh in as well. And to the extent that we may, as we get closer and closer to our deadline, we may be finding greater and greater points of disagreement. So trying to remain open-minded and listening to perspectives that are different from our own. We are actively needing to be in problem-solving orientation, again, given our time constraints, but recognizing the complexity of this issue. And in an ideal world, we are striving toward a consensus set of recommendations that we will be submitting. A reminder that all meetings are open to the public. Comments are on the record. The meeting is being recorded and it's available to all of you and the public for later viewing. This is posted on the webpage for this task force on the Maine Climate Council's, GoPIF's website, on the Maine Climate Council website. And then please, we're all human. We know each other, and we're being kind and respectful of each other, and certainly needn't be too serious here. So with that, a quick review of the agenda. We're going to be hearing from, I think, maybe tag teaming Dawn and Adam, however you like, in reviewing page 3 with us, and the additional analysis and number crunching that they together did to come up with current stocking rates. And then we'll be spending a fair amount of time on my attempt to pull your conversation into something coherent from the last meeting and really just get your reactions to it. And my hope is that you're super comfortable saying, no, this is not at all what we had in mind, because the more you have something to react to, the faster you'll get to something that you like. There will be brief reports from the 2 subgroups who were kind enough to do quite a bit of work in between the last meeting and this one. First about the open space program, and then secondly about the issue of the need for greater markets for low-grade timber. We'll have an opportunity for public input, as we always do a quick review of the executive order to see if we're missing anything, and then some housekeeping at the end, particularly the opportunity to now be bringing on an intern to support our work part-time now between now and the end of August. So any questions about what we're doing? No? Okay. All right. So why don't I then turn it over to Dawn and Adam to walk us through and then get your reactions to the work that they did. So if you could turn to page 3 in your packet.
Okay.
Don, you
Everybody
want-
there?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So I'm going to direct your attention first to the table at the bottom of page 3. That is a slight revision to what we presented last meeting based on the feedback we got. And so I'll tell you what we did. We modified a couple of best guesses. We added the information about carbon content. Thank you, Adam. We also added a couple of columns to include the all private acreage, so you could compare this 10 to 10,000 acre land classification, and added percentages there. So the changes to what we discussed last time, we modified our best guess on total harvest on these acres to about 5.3 million tons. The FIA removals of bulls came in at 3.8 million tons, but it still worked out percentage-wise there in terms of the total percentage of private harvesting. It's fairly close. 42 and 44%. We've revised the long-term storage number for sawlogs downward based on the assumption that only about 60% of the sawlog volume goes into long-term storage. Any questions on that before we move up to the upper table?
Don, I had one, and it's about the first 3 footnotes under that table.
Yep.
And I think this is me failing to understand what you're presenting. So it looks like those footnotes they do give very different percentages than what we see in the right-hand column. Can you explain those differences for me?
Yeah, the 29% of the in the National Woodland Owner Survey figure, that's percentage of all private. The 24, I think that might have just been like a ballpark that we threw out the first time, but it's in there in the 25%. It's it's definitely 4.7 million acres according to NWOS. And if you just divide that into 17.5, whatever that number is, that's the percentage. So it may just be something that got carried over, or Jeremy might have done some.
Yeah, I guess I can
tweaking.
add a little bit more to that, Don. The
Yep.
other issue is that when you ask FIA to report out by these different size ownership classes, there's a high proportion that it comes out as unknown. So the 10 to 10,000 at the bottom is what they specifically list as known. And then then we use that, we start with that and then scale basically those unknown classifications, sort of distribute that sort of across the different classes to get up to a higher number, because we know that what they report is not every single actual ownership that falls into that class.
Yep. Thank you.
Yep.
Anything
Mark,
else
you're
there?
muted.
Would it be sort of accurate to take those 2 things and say that you would put more weight on the estimates that you're providing in the right-hand column and less weight on the estimates that are in those footnotes?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, those footnotes would be like a definite lower bound of the report.
Tom, Doak, go right ahead.
So I think last time we were trying to figure out the conflict in the data between the acres owned, the percentage of land owned by those owners, and then the percentage of harvest. And I was trying to read the chart. So we're saying that those owners, the National Woodland Owner Survey says that land is 29% owned by those folks, but the harvest data shows 44% of the volume. Is that what this chart shows?
That's what it shows.
Which is not possible, is it?
But we're not the harvest is not using the National Woodland Owners Survey number.
Right, understand. But
Yeah.
we're saying those owners own 29% of the land, but produce 44% of the volume into which.
It's not an apples to oranges comparison. So that's what you have to look at the harvest relative to the actual larger number that we use that's larger than the National Woodland Owners Survey.
Well, that, to me, that shows you one set of data isn't correct, right?
Exactly. That's, I guess, why we have a lot of ranges and a lot of percentages. So to me, it seems like it's more comforting to say probably that the harvest is somewhere between 24 and whatever, the 40 something percent. Area is somewhere between, 40, what is it? 20, I mean, yeah, between the footnotes and then the numbers that we have on the right-hand side is,
Well,
I would interpret it
yeah.
more as a range.
That's why footnote 3 says account for over 24%, because we're uncertain about that upper bound.
So can we just dial back a minute, bring it up to a higher elevation and say, why does this matter? And if I'm not going to try to guess as to why it mattered, but I think it would be helpful if somebody could illuminate the rest of us about that. It matters because it's going to influence what demographic of landowners you might focus a program on. I don't want to get into the weeds if it's not super relevant. So can Adam or Don or anyone else help the rest of us understand that?
Well, if you're going to be measuring progress toward goals that are established through this process or some other process, then you need to have some baseline to measure from.
Yep, and then on top of that, I think it's validating that us thinking about how can we shift the needle on owners that fall in this 10 to 10,000 acre class. We're not talking about 2% of Maine's forest land, right? So it's also establishing that if we're somewhere between this 24 and 43%, this is a sizable chunk, which supports this group thinking about what we can do. Is
Right.
Another way that I'm really setting back and saying, this is a non-trivial number. It's worthy of going forward and pursuing ideas on how to shift the needle.
Karen, thank you, Adam. Karen, go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And in addition to the size of this group in relation to ownership of forest land across Maine, I am kind of with Tom Doak and wondering, like, kind of the harvest volume was so large, and we've been hearing a bit over the course of the meetings that this class of ownership really doesn't harvest that much. That more outreach and more, help to engage with this group, or at least a part of that group. So having a really good sense of the activity, the harvest, makes sense. It's important for that reason, I think, as well.
Thank you. Tom, did you have your hand up again? And then Ivan?
Yeah, just real quick. I think this chart is, Jody, I think actually I wouldn't even include it. It's confusing. I would include this in the report. I would simply, because I think it's, if we're saying that we know it's a significant number of acres, we kind of know that, and I think we can do that in a text. I think that interesting thing that Karen brings up is that the premise we're operating under is that those landowners are not harvesting at a rate, that they could be harvesting at. And this data seems to show the reverse, which we probably should be able to answer that question. But I think this chart is, to me, it shows an obvious, somewhere the data doesn't make sense. So I think we should just strike it. And I don't think we need it for our work anyway. So I would say that we don't need it.
I'm seeing one clap about that. Maybe others agree. It would be helpful to have others maybe put a thumbs up if you agree with that. And then I'll take Ivan while you're doing that. And then Mark.
So thanks, Jody. I probably don't agree with that, in the sense that I think the work that these data are contributing to is to try and understand relative to the total ownership of forest land in Maine, what does this cohort, 10 to 10,000 acres, contribute to both ownership, to the amount of carbon sequestration? As Adam said, if it's a small amount, it's a smaller concern. If it's a larger amount, which it is, than 2%, then we really want to know, where are the greatest, what's the low-hanging fruit within that? What components should a program target to yield the most important or the biggest carbon value? And these kind of data are important. That they don't match is problematic. And so I think, Mark, you said, I strongly encourage us to begin to move to summarized data where all of that kind of discussion has taken place, so that we can focus on decision making, because there's a lot of, we get lost in the weeds rather quickly. My real question was getting lost in the weeds. Footnote 4, Don or Adam, 60% of sawlog volumes goes into long-term storage. Is long-term defined? Is it 100 years? Is it?
This is just, yeah, so this is something that's the average over a saw log grade product, and it's only in year 0. So then there's decay and landfill and all that will diminish that.
Okay, all right, I understand. Great,
Yep.
thank you.
Okay, so Mark was not enthusiastic, but he had a comment. Go right ahead.
Which is not to say I don't appreciate Tom's comment. I just wasn't moved to applause. The point that I thought is worth making, I really appreciate what Karen and Tom have raised, that what we're seeing in this data is a substantial amount of harvest from landowners in this size class. And I think where the narrative that we've been exploring about, relatively lacking harvest activity from small landowners probably was not a narrative that was focused on landowners of 1,000 to 10,000 acres, so much as it was, focused on truly smaller woodlot owners. And, that's a huge size range between 10 and 10,000 acres in terms of what it means to be an owner of forest land at that scale and how you tend to interact with it. And my speculation would be that a lot of this volume is still coming off the larger ownerships within this very large range.
So let me just answer a public question quickly so that folks who are listening in know where to go. And Tom Gordon, I'm wondering if you could embed in the chat the web link to the Forest Carbon Task Force webpage on the Maine Climate Council website, so folks can look at the meeting materials that we've got that we're working with today, if you're willing to do that. Okay, sorry, where were we? Karen, go right ahead.
Yeah, I think as we move forward and think about a report, recognizing the different the range and the likely different harvest levels in that range, as Mark you just spoke to, is going to be important. And I think the other thing is just the need maybe for more refined data. I mean, let's not just ignore this, but think about what additional data would be helpful over time. Recognize that the data is so maybe not as detailed and available as we would like, and then be very clear about what we're extrapolating from it. So I don't want to completely paper it over or ignore it. But just recognize your huge ranges here. And I think it is important not to use the narrative that we might have been using that's applicable to the really smaller woodlot owners, that there's not as much harvest activity. We just need to be careful of that narrative and apply it where it really is accurate.
And I think this raises the question, sort of, if you could keep all of this in the back of your mind when we pivot to the conversation about the draft outline of a program, because one of the things that I was gleaning from your conversation from the last meeting was there's a very small percentage of the landowners between 10 and 10,000 acres that have forest management plans, that you need to beef that up considerably if you're going to have active management happen, because without a forest management plan, it appears as though active forest management isn't happening. And so if this data is kind of changing the way you might think about that, and the way you might think about how to prioritize technical assistance to different subgroups within this group, I think these two issues are deeply connected, and I just want you to keep them in mind as you're reviewing this next agenda item. We're just a couple minutes from shifting to that, so I wanted to see if there are any final either questions or comments about the data.
I guess before we do shift, I had a question about the upper table and what the size classes actually are in that table.
Adam or Don, which of you would like to speak to that?
I'll let Adam play with it.
But now you caught me on the spot. So it's however FIA defines it. So it's a certain diameter at breast height, I think, that defines one versus the other, or basal area or something. But off the top of my head, I'm not exactly sure. Mark, let me circle back through my emails, and I'll drop it in the chat as we move on today.
Alec, go ahead. You're on mute.
It's important to understand exactly what FIA does, and it's not necessarily intuitive from what you might think. You see large and you think a stand of large trees that extends substantially. You can have things which are classified as large diameter stands because they have large diameter trees in them, but the bulk of the area is occupied by a sea of seedlings and saplings. So you have to really be into what the FIA definition is to understand those categories.
So one of the requirements, obviously, in the executive order is to, this final item is to recommend a numeric goal or targets for increased carbon sequestration in Maine over time. And as I was understanding it, this is, I guess I'm looking for the degree to which you find this upper table helpful and would want included, if you will, in a final report, because it helps build some rationale behind that target that you will ultimately need to come up with. All right, no feedback yet. All right, fine. Ivan, go ahead.
Well, if I understand the question, we had an email exchange since these tables came out. I keep looking for what's the total potential of this ownership between 10 and 10,000 acres if it was all fully stocked compared to where we are right now. That's the increment that this program, I believe, is targeting. And I don't see that. I don't think I see that in this table. If the program was wildly successful and all poorly and moderately stocked stands were increased over 20 years to well-stocked, how much additional carbon would we sequester? You could prorate it back and compare it to greenhouse gases. That's the kind of comparison I'm ultimately looking for, although this is the groundwork for it, if I'm following right.
Yeah, before I take you, Alec, I see you. I just want to see if Adam and Don could maybe respond to that and let us all know whether it's possible to figure that out.
Yep, and we did an exchange. So Ivan, you can go back to your email and look at what we said, but I believe it roughly said it that we just naively assume that you move all the moderately and poorly stocked area increased it up to the level of sort of average, biomass or carbon density of the well-stocked, you get roughly, I don't know, it was 0.8 million tons or something like that. So again, not trivial number, but also is not gonna, totally offset all Maine's fossil fuel emissions or anything like that.
Right. And I guess my only point is, this is all the groundwork, but ultimately a program that goes forward, those that view what we're saying are, I think, want to see in relatively simple format. This is the increment of potential, and this program is going to move us down that road, whatever our target is, but our target is within that kind of increment. And in our little quick email exchange, I think it was 5% or 10% of current greenhouse gas emissions would have been offset on a per year basis for that kind of increase in carbon sequestration.
Let me take Alec and then Karen.
Okay, so I'll be interested in having a conversation with Adam about how exactly they did that calculation. But let me just point out, going back to the earlier conversation, there's more to this than an area just being fully stocked. It could be fully stocked with seedlings and have very little carbon, or it could be fully stocked with larger trees and have way more carbon. So again, you need to understand exactly what FIA means when they talk about fully stocked. That doesn't mean fully stocked with big trees. It means that the ground is occupied by a tree of one size or another.
Let me take Karen and then suggest something as a group to get your reaction to, so that we can also move on in the agenda. Go ahead, Karen.
Well, just a request that if it's possible for that email exchange between the experts to be summarized and shared with us, because I couldn't take notes fast enough there to really get those numbers down. And it sounds like it could be helpful. So just suggesting that if possible.
Yeah, so let me build on that. If you could go back to the agenda, and if you could skip to the very end where we're talking about this GoPIF intern, Logan Woodyard, who has just joined GoPIF as of 3 days ago and has roughly, I think, half-ish of her time available to this group to be of support. And there's been some offline conversations between Tom and Amanda, Adam, and GoPIF staff about what might be the best use of her time. Is she on the call right now? I don't know. We happy to have her jump in and introduce herself. But anyway, I'm wondering if, Adam, you could just really briefly talk right now about her possible focus to get feedback from this group. And part of what I'm wondering is whether it might be useful to have essentially a subgroup that is connecting with you and her on a regular basis, so that we can really be making progress and arrive at this answer sooner rather than later as to where we want to go with it. So do you want to describe where we're at right now with her?
Sure. Yep. So Logan Woodyard is a master's student working with me. Her focus is all really on understanding sort of, what's the potential that Maine can, what's the forest offset potential that can be achieved in Maine, and what are the sort of economic and policy implications behind that. She's entering into her second year, has done has been, in addition, we keep referring to Jeremy Frank in the Forest Service and helping compile numbers. Logan has also been the other one who's sort of behind the scenes, has been helping us develop a lot of the numbers behind some of the things we're talking about, including one of the first meetings that we had, where I sort of shared a table of here's all the potential, or here's where all the current forest offset projects are being implemented in Maine and things like that. The sort of idea that this came about is that, we went through the list of the task force, and the one right at the bottom is where we're actually supposed to come up with some sort of numerical target, right? Or at least guidelines to get up towards that. And it's become pretty apparent that then when people want carbon in numbers, they tend to come to me, right? And so that's why I have these numerous exchanges with various with various people that are part of the task force and others. So the idea is to have sort of Logan sort of be dedicated to helping work with myself and others who are more on the quantitative side, respond to some of these questions, help us compile the numbers and keep it a bit more organized, so that ultimately what we'll do is we can sort of go through a list of studies that have been done to date, and get a better idea around what is truly achievable. It's not necessarily going to be any sort of new modeling beyond sort of, back of the envelope type stuff, which, one of them is this exchange that Don, Jeremy, and I had with Ivan when he looked at the table and asked more questions. But it's at least going to help us move in that direction. So at least we can say, based on the literature that's out there, the modeling that's been done to date, and our sort of collective understanding of how sort of forests grow and carbon accumulate here in the state, this is where we think could be achieved, or how much could be done over a given time period under different conditions.
So I just want to see if maybe with thumbs up or thumbs down, if you have any sort of your overall feeling about that. I realize there's been a lot happening quickly, so I'm hoping that you're not all feeling left in the dark about this. And if you're comfortable with proceeding in this manner, and if you are, if there are others, I'm thinking of certainly Ivan and Alec and maybe Mark and anyone else who's interested, being sort of a collective sounding board as she develops pieces of information so that you can be ground truthing it. Reactions to all of that, please. Go ahead, Tom.
Well, we're talking about a very technical field here, and I look at I, and it says recommend a numerical goal or targets for increased carbon sequestration, and I'm not sure we've ever, as a group, come to an agreement on what actually that means. And there's a ton of data out there. I just think this data is not presented the right. It's not anybody's fault, but I don't think we're agreed upon. This is how we want to measure where we are in success. And part of this is what happens if we don't do anything. I mean, there's growth going on, so we may have more carbon regardless of what we do. So there's modeling involved. So it's pretty technical, but at some point we need a simple way of measuring where we are and where we want to go. And I'm not sure we have a common understanding of that.
And one other thing that, to complicate this, I think part of our difficulty comes from trying to constrain ourselves to 10 to 10,000 acres, right? If we were asking what's our total forest carbon in the state, we have a couple of different data sources that we would look to. They have slightly different answers, but in general, we can point to an answer more readily. Trying to monitor over time and constrain it to 10 to 10,000 acres is even more difficult, because lands don't inherently stay in the same size of ownerships. Ownerships get fragmented, ownerships get conglomerated. Obviously, we lose forest land over time. So trying to establish a goal for a particular size class is also going to be difficult unless it is based on an average. And that's not going to be a sufficient goal, because it won't encompass avoiding forest land loss. So we may need more than one number to establish a goal here.
All right, here's what I'm thinking, because it's 10:35 and we should move on to the next agenda item. I am wondering, because we want to make best use of the limited amount of time that we have with a highly skilled intern that's been offered to us, that I am wondering if Ivan, Tom Doak, Alec, Mark, obviously Adam as the point person, Patrick, would be willing, anyone else, raise your hand, not meaning to exclude, would be willing to sort of be the subgroup that is regularly providing feedback to and being in connection with Adam to help direct Logan's work. I don't think we're going to get this accomplished in any other way unless we sort of have a fair amount of work happening offline. What do you all think about that as a way forward? Okay. All right, I'm seeing now.
Jody, this is Tom. I think that's a good idea, and would just note Tracy's comment in the chat about cords per acre as maybe another way to approach this.
Great. Adam, are you seeing that? And could you take that under advisement?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, this
Right.
comes back to like what are common metrics that people can actually relate to, right? And chords is one of probably the 5 that we think of. So
Yeah,
that's a good point from Tracy.
Okay. All right, good. Then let's pivot. Thank you for that. Thank you, Adam and Dawn, for doing the work that you did, and there'll be more to report next month. So if you could turn to page 4 through 6, and literally what I did is I just listened to the video, the audio from the last meeting, and then I listened to it again, and then I listened to it again, and tried to synthesize as best I could the overarching sentiments that you had, and then sort of broke it out into 3 areas. One is where you just think in general this idea of technical assistance and communication should go, and that what I was hearing was that you wanted that to be kind of the overarching focus of the program, but that you didn't want to lose the idea that you had identified best management practices for achieving carbon objectives. And so they're in there as well. I tried to acknowledge that at the same time, you were supportive of the idea of modifying the open space current use taxation program, and there'll be more conversation about that later. And then when I finished, it just, those 4 questions on page 6 were what occurred to me that I wasn't clear about. And you all may have had your own list of questions that came up as well. I'm just going to open it up and see reactions, hear reactions from whoever would like to start. And we'll just have an open conversation for at least 25 minutes, maybe more. Alec, go ahead.
Okay, so I guess the way that I come at this is, it's clear that we're facing an unprecedented global challenge. And from the work that we've done at NEF, which is New England wide to a large extent, but also we have information on Maine, that we have a very significant opportunity to contribute to addressing this global challenge in New England's forests. And we also have the opportunity to show what forests really could do, which I don't see happening elsewhere. So for example, the work that we've done leads us to conclude that simply increasing stocking to what we would consider ideal levels in New England, most of it in Maine, the great majority of it in Maine, would be equivalent to taking 1 million cars off the road for a century. I mean, huge opportunity if we really capitalize on this. I think Jody, you've done good work, you and Tom Gordon and others who contributed to summarizing the conversations that we've had up to this point. And I certainly agree with the idea of providing the most reliable information that we can to Maine's small landowners. But I believe that we can do far more than this. Recognizing that that's extremely challenging because designing these kind of programs is very difficult. And none of us are really experts in that kind of area. But I think in Maine, we do have the critical mass of knowledge, interest, forest land base, interest in forestry that we could really make a difference and live up to the state's motto of Dirigo. So I think we really can make a difference here. And along those lines, I've been puzzling over different things that we could do. And the best suggestion that I've heard, I didn't come up with this independently, was that the administration could issue an RFP to call on people, companies, individuals to tap into the creative talent that exists out there that knows far more about this than we do, about what Maine could do to both increase carbon storage, and I would say that that should be writ large to include product as well as material stored in the forest, and at the same time maintain harvest levels. So I would suggest that we can do far more, and suggest that we consider calling for the administration to issue an RFP that would get the creative juices flowing and give us some good proposals to review. I do have a few slides if you want to see them that kind of explain a little bit of the background on this and the work that we've done that underlies this suggestion.
Thank you, Alec. Let's hear, I mean, honestly, what I'd really like to do is hear from every single one of you, just sort of your general reaction to what you read, whether you felt it was sufficient. Yeah, I think we do need to basically hear from every committee member at this, every task force member at this point, in no order, no particular order.
Well, I'll speak up. I would second Alex's suggestion. I think, you know, there's half a dozen or so companies out there who have carbon programs, and they've been working on it for a long time. And I don't think we need to really reinvent the wheel. And any solution that we come up with is going to need to be a financially solvent and doable thing. And rather than just saying, oh, this is a great idea, it's, you know, someone's gonna have to pay for it somehow. And these companies have been in business doing it for a while, and no one has a complete handle in the market. And there's different approaches to the sequestration approach and how that's compensated for landowners. But I like the idea of putting out an RFP, and I think that there isn't going to be a one size fits all solution. There's going to be some landowners who kind of want to do the minimal, but maybe don't get compensated as much as those who do really top notch work. But I think we need to accommodate everything. And I think the idea of having an RFP it definitely would be an incentive for the companies to come up with some creative solutions, and rather than depend on the Maine Forest Service or some other entity to do so. And also, just as kind of a side, I think it'd be good to see the slides that Alec has provided or is offering to provide.
Can I just ask both of you, when you're making this suggestion, are you making it instead of, in lieu of, what is summarized on pages 4 through 6? Like, yeah, we had this conversation last month, but forget about it and let's go in this direction instead, or in addition to? Could you both clarify that?
I would say it's definitely complementary. I would not see it as the either or thing. I mean, there's a lot on these pages 4 through 6, which are, it's kind of a big collection of a lot of ideas. And I think what Alec is proposing is one fairly comprehensive way of doing it, but it's not, you know, they're not mutually exclusive.
I'm certainly not suggesting it instead of, Jody. I'm suggesting it as another element that we could include that I think would could help us bundle a lot of this stuff that's covered in there together and get a really coherent view of what we could do.
Okay, thank you. All right, others? Karen, go ahead.
Well, I was waiting for others to speak up, but saw not much happening. So first of all, thank you for what I think was a very accurate summary of our discussion. And I felt that it rang true to my recollection of the meeting and the ideas raised. Second, I really don't want to lose this core concept of a program that I've always imagined Maine Forest Service being the lead on. And I think a few others spoke to that importance at the last meeting. The fact that there are so many up and coming upstart kind of carbon offset voluntary programs is what has made it sort of a difficult challenge, I think, for me in envisioning what Maine should do. And so having Maine Forest Service, if that is the entity that is the leadership of a program in Maine, to actively follow them, know about them, help landowners connect to them, be a clearinghouse, and as someone said, not in a passive way, but a proactive way, seems essential. A fear that I've had is that we just come up with a list of practices that are nice and helpful, and no real structure to help smaller landowners receive funds. And I was really moved by some of the public comment at the end of our last meeting, so we weren't able to really circle back. Let's not forget that some of the beneficial forest management that will help sequester and store carbon and continue to have harvesting requires money. And so just encouraging, providing technical assistance, having nice, practice sheets, in my mind, isn't enough. And I just don't want us to end up with just that. And so finding a way to have a mechanism for landowners to participate and get funding is essential. And we're at a time when a lot of these programs aren't proven yet. A lot of these models aren't proven. And so, one idea I've had is that we should not end this group at the proposed ending point now, but come back in a year after more has been done. And then finally, I did hear this idea of an RFP. I think it is very intriguing, and it taps the creativity and the entrepreneurship and ambition of some of these startups or other programs that are getting going. And I think the Maine Forest Service, if they are the lead on the Maine carbon program, could be the one to sort of administer the RFP in concert with whomever else is appropriate in Maine government. But I think it's an intriguing idea.
Thank you. Melissa, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just echo what Karen is saying about using the Maine Forest Service. I think it's an organization that people trust and know, and I think a lot of these carbon initiatives are a little unproven in some ways, and having the Maine Forest Service either be a leader in who gets to join or who can participate in the clearinghouse, I think that would have some value, in my opinion.
Great, thank you. Ivan, go ahead.
Yeah, just echo what others have said, particularly Karen. I thought you did a great job summarizing, but I think I experienced as well as far as the discussion. I think there's a lot there that is valuable. I wouldn't want to lose it as a substitute for some other pathway. And I know, Alec, you're not suggesting that. There's obviously, of course, a number of points of worth or need of discussion, clarification, et cetera, but good job. I also am intrigued by what Alec proposes. I guess I would ask, if we're going to aim high and dream, do we want to limit it to 10,000 acres or less, or do we want to go beyond that? Just food for thought. So thanks.
Mhm. Mhm. Others, let's hear from everyone in one way or another. Tom, go ahead.
Thanks, Jody. Yeah, I really like the idea of the role that we have talked about with the Forest Service playing that clearinghouse, technical assistance, communication role. I wonder if there's a way to address Alex's suggestion in some sort of a pilot phase. I would agree with what Karen had said about some of the programs are, we just don't know. They're new, they're unknown, unproven over the long term. And so is there a way to kind of narrow the RFP to one piece of what we're trying to do as a test? So there's that for consideration. And then I guess I continue to go all the way back to what we learned early on. I think it was the presentation from Tom, where he talked about 86,000 landowners in this cohort. Only 27% of them have a forest management plan. There's a lot of untapped potential there. Currently, if those landowners do nothing, or if they're operating without the plan, there are ways that we can incentivize and address those things. And I don't want to lose the fact that, I think that there's a large role for the Forest Service to play in that clearinghouse communication effort to that group of people who are owning land, but maybe are uncertain or unclear of what to do next.
Mm-hmm. I think it was Tom and Mark in that order. If I'm wrong, my apologies.
I think Mark was ahead of me.
Okay.
And I wasn't going to worry about it. So Jody, my thanks as well, because I think you did capture a lot of what we've been discussing and considering here. And I think there's a lot of value in the framework that you're trying to help us create. I guess I share, some uncertainty about how much of an impact we're able to have with the elements that we have included so far.
Mm-hmm.
We've had that question all along. If we don't have a meaningful source of funding, how big of an impact opportunity do we have? I fully believe the opportunity on the ground is enormous. And the question is, how big of a lever are we able to deploy? And I like that you pulled a couple of pieces up, to the top, separate from the technical assistance and clearinghouse role. I strongly am aligned with the first bullet about protecting forest land. I felt there might be one missing in that top section that is about improving conditions and carbon stocking on forest land. That just isn't in that top section as strongly as it could be. And in the bullet about markets, I know we'll discuss that later in today's agenda. My concern there was, and I did have some concern, it was really a presentation concern rather than, I think, a substantive one. But I think we share some understanding that markets are a necessary condition, but they're not a sufficient condition for improving forest carbon outcomes. Markets for low-grade wood by themselves will not improve forest carbon outcomes. So they're, again, I think they are a necessary condition, but they're not a sufficient condition.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we want to be talking about, in addition to markets for low-grade wood, markets for long-lived forest products, how they work together. And I think the discussion that Dana and others have had does that, but this shorter bullet kind of misses it.
Okay, got it.
One last thing, just to the RFP, I think we should give more thought to that, but my immediate question is, what is the state offering in such an RFP? Each of these existing entities has opportunity to move forward with pilot programs, to offer programs to landowners now. And so I'm not clear on, Alec, what you're proposing or what others may be thinking that the state would be offering in an RFP.
I'm seeing the order in which people have raised hands. I'm not ignoring you. Is there anything that you want to say really quickly in response to that, Alec? Or not? It's fine, either way.
Yeah, I guess I would say, Mark, to be determined. Is it the full faith and consequent and support of the state of Maine, which has some charisma? Is it that we could offer something tangible? All of that kind of thing could be made clear in the proposals that we receive. And we can ask the people making the proposals to be clear on what it is that they would find most beneficial in that regard.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got Tom and then Dana and then Ryan and then Amanda.
So I think, Jody, I think you did a good job of capturing a lot of the pieces there. I will say that I do think the Forest Service is the place as the clearinghouse. I do think that we need to think about how to beef up their ability to deal with this. I did mention, I think last time, that we're testing the different systems with our own lands because we have a carbon inventory now. And we will be actually sponsoring in the fall a conference for small landowners for them to understand how to participate in carbon markets. And we have a request in now for some funding to hire a person to focus on that issue for us. So those are all kind of in the works. The resource things are changing so quickly. I mean, the concern I have about a RFP is I think the world is changing so quickly that I think whatever comes out of the RFP will be obsolete when it's finished. Because if you think about when we started this process, how much has changed in just a year, and I think it will change dramatically. And I think the Forest Service keeping track of how it's going and being the focus point is the right approach, instead of hiring somebody through an RFP to develop something that I think will change ultimately. One other piece of information is I do chair this group with Maine that's looking at small woodland owners and how to get more assistance to them. And we are focused, if you remember my presentation, we're focused on woodland retreat people, which are half of the woodland owners, and small woodlanders in Maine are woodland retreat type owners. And specifically looking at the people that own 50 acres or more, because that's 3/4 of the acreage of those people. That report, we have a draft report, and I'll share it with the group once we have a meeting next week of the group, and hopefully we'll approve the report, and I'll share that with you. But there's a whole bunch of information in there about how to reach these folks, and carbon is certainly part of that equation. So I guess those are my thoughts.
Okay. All right, thank you. Dana, go ahead.
Thanks, Jody. I'll echo what everyone said. I think you did a fine job summarizing the thoughts and ideas that were put forth. So I'll give you some reaction to what you've got on paper, and then reaction to Alex's idea and some other thoughts. So in terms of the Forest Service, I'm not sure I'm ready to go to a clearinghouse and administering a program, but I do think the Forest Service could do a terrific job providing technical assistance, best practices, recommendations, doing the data collection, assessment, inventory, etc. I think it's right in their wheelhouse. It could be done with some additional staff. I'm not ready to start saying, let's hire a bunch of more foresters to go out on the ground, because I don't think that has moved the needle tremendously. So throwing more money at doing the same thing is not exactly, I'm not ready to go there yet. But I definitely think there's a great role for the Forest Service to do a lot of good work there under their umbrella. That said, with what you've put forth, a couple of the things that I think are missing, and I don't think it was intentional on your part, there are assumptions that still have to be played out as to how the work is going to be done. There's a huge piece, and it's in the executive order regarding contractors, and there's going to be an issue not an issue, but there's going to be an impact of how work is going to be done, how folks are going to be compensated, what are they going to be asked to do. And I'm talking about on the contractor side. That involves cost and doesn't involve compensation, that has to be investigated and played out, whether it's through this plan or as part of this process. I think that's still a conversation that has to take place. There's a verification piece to all of this that isn't included yet in what you put together. And that's that on the ground verification piece that still needs to be determined. Again, it's going to be part of an ongoing conversation of whatever program is rolled out, but verification is key in all of this. Third, I think I still go back to whatever program is created, I think has to be voluntary, and it has to be separate and distinct from government. I think if landowners see, I think if landowners are empowered, they see opportunity to manage their own land, they see opportunities for technology. I go back to my LiDAR idea. I think they will get more engaged and empowered as a result. They also have to see financial incentives, and financial incentives don't always come from government. They can come in a multitude of other ways. That said, I think there has to be a consistent linkage to the certification systems, FSC, SFI, PEFC, et cetera. And that, of course, can loop in the verification piece. And I think I'm looking big picture here. You know, your global companies that are embracing certified content, your Staples, IKEA, et cetera, there has to be linkage with that. And that's where those incentives are going to come from. Lastly, to Alex's idea on RFP, I think it's a good idea to get ideas on how programs could run and how a voluntary program could run. I think we should look for ideas from others that we may not be thinking of at this specific moment in time that could be beneficial to our conversation. And I don't think we're going to come up with a program in 6 months. This is going to take years. And I'm open to finding best practices from others that could be helpful to our process. So I'll stop there.
Great, thank you, Dana. Ryan.
Thanks, Jody. And I'll reiterate, like everybody else has, that I think you did a good job recapping the discussions from the last meeting and prior meetings. I think from my perspective, I'm still supportive of the Maine Forest Service and other conservation partners like the woodland owners being an avenue to provide technical assistance, and the Maine Forest Service acting as a clearinghouse for carbon programs for landowners to better understand and potentially make that decision that this is a good fit for me or it's not. I think the other concern that I had is that obviously that would require substantial investment in terms of staff and the capability to provide that information to landowners. And when Alec had mentioned the possibility of an RFP, I questioned whether or not we should advocate for making that investment in Maine Forest Service ahead of understanding what might be the outcome of an RFP. But still, I think regardless of if we go down the road of advocating for an RFP and what that might look like and the outputs from that, I think that's going to still require some capacity in the Maine Forest Service to assist in implementing, those avenues or potentials that might come out of an RFP. So I'm still supportive of Maine Forest Service as a clearinghouse for these efforts, and I also support Alec's concept of an RFP. Ultimately, we'll have to discuss, what does that actually mean? What potential components of carbon program in Maine might that be focused on, or is it the full suite of issues that we've been talking here? So that's my perspective.
Great, thank you, Brian. Amanda, go ahead.
Unmute. No.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thanks. My computer was telling me that I was still muted, even though I wasn't. Yeah, so this is a great discussion. And I don't think it's any surprise for me to say that I also would support the Forest Service in being, really central in implementing the recommendations that we come forth with in the end. And I agree with Dana's comment about, there is going to need to be ongoing evaluation and monitoring of sort of the suite of programs that are available, and just how this whole realm progresses over time. Another thing I just wanted to say in terms of the RFP, I guess I'm also a little unclear about what is meant by an RFP. And I'm also wondering if, in the process of developing our recommendations, I imagine at some point we're going to have a document that we want public input on. Maybe I'm wrong, but that in my mind, I thought that might be where we would be going. And perhaps at that point in time, there's an opportunity to, solicit feedback in a specific way that might bring more ideas forth. And we can even be deliberate in thinking about, targeting certain entities that we want feedback from. So that's just something to throw in the mix. In terms of the document, the summary that you pulled together, Jody, I think it's great. I know there's been a lot of ideas, and getting them pulled together in this format has been really helpful for me. I feel obligated to complicate one of the bullet points, and I probably also won't be a surprise to anybody, but the one around on page 6 around planting forests on marginal agricultural lands. So I just want to point out that there's also some stated goals in the Maine Climate Action Plan around increasing production of food and agricultural products and increasing consumption of Maine produced food. And in order to do that, we are going to be needing to look at how we use agricultural lands. And perhaps some marginal lands should be planted, into forests. But I also want to point out, and this is based on my own dissertation research, which is not published, so I can't point to anything right now. But there is a fair amount of land in Maine under forest that contains prime agricultural soils and soils of statewide importance in relation to agricultural production. So there might be more of a conversation we have to have around what is the intersection between keeping forests as forests and meeting some of the other goals of the Climate Action Plan. And so the other one other thing I just wanted to mention is just that I think there could be another bullet, or it could be discussed somewhere about Forest Service and others continuing to look at existing programs that could play a supportive role in implementing the recommendations that we put forth. So, for example, we have a cost share program that supports landowners in creating forest management plans, as does NRCS. And I think probably, the Maine Forest Service and NRCS could do a better job of putting that, climate sequestration opportunity forward. And we have been talking about that at the department. So I don't want to say we're not looking at that option, but just to name it, that's an opportunity. And other opportunities that I see within, in particular, our department is some more intersection between the Forest Service and our Bureau of Agriculture. For example, we could be doing more to promote agroforestry and silvopasture practices that allow forests to be forests, but also to create an opportunity for agricultural production, even on a commercial scale. So that's just one opportunity that I see, and I see others as well. For example, many farms have forests, have woodlots, and they're not actively managing them. So how can we really, create more partnerships there? So I'll stop there. Those were kind of, a number of different ideas that have been percolating for me, but thanks.
Awesome, thank you. Patrick, go ahead.
Sure. Now, keep in mind, this is not my creative time of year. I'm in Kill Bill modes right now, but I think Jody did a good job. I like the Maine Forest Service being involved in the central trusted figure in doing this. keep in mind, my industry is trying to grow from a $8.5 billion industry to a $12 billion industry. That's the potential we see. And so we have to kind of match up all of these values. We have to celebrate what we are doing now, but it can't be a lens of an ideal carbon program that only focuses on a carbon. And I think throughout the document, there's a lot of discussion about that. There's still some wordsmithing. Carbon sequestration considerations would be the central component of forest management plans. I think we might work on that language a little bit more. I've noticed in the discussion, everybody wants to expand the scope of this group into the larger land base, and 10,000 acres is half a township. So you're already capturing quite a few of my members when you start going into that size category. There are actually quite a few that are in that commercial forest land category. So I think we need to have discipline and define who it is we're trying to work with in this group. I like the idea of a pilot and trying some things, but let's really define which group we're working with and how to do that. Private landowners are watching these markets very carefully. They know exactly what the cost of carbon is. The large landowners do. They know what tipping points are in the future, and they're very well informed about how they're going to participate in the carbon markets and at what level. So just as a balancing force to keep us focused on the task at hand. And so I think Jody did a great job of working with the document. And I don't know, Commissioner Beal, whoever wins the battle between poor farmland and poor forest land, it'll be on the basis of carbon, I guess. I don't know how that'll come out, but we'll work it out somehow.
Thank
So
you.
just some of my thoughts.
Thank you. Who did I miss? Don, do you want to weigh in?
I'm mostly good. I think that there were some points that have been made about Maine Forest Service administering like being a broker or whatnot. And I just think that's something for the private and nonprofit sector to deal with. And getting to Patrick's point about expanding into the his larger ownerships, I agree with him on that. As I recall, the discussion at the Natural and Working Lands Group was about incentivizing or making more efficient the programs for the smaller land ownerships. So that would argue for a focus on the folks that we customarily serve through our existing programs. The larger owners have this figured out, and they can decide what they want to do on their own without any assistance from us.
Okay, all right, thank you. Did I miss anyone? I'm thinking not. Okay, so we're about 10 minutes over where we were going to be on this agenda. We've got a presentation or just, an overview from Mark on what you read on the open space program, wanting to get reactions from you on that. I think I need your feedback on what would be the best use of your remaining time beyond that. I recognize that you have, at least on the agenda, there's a brief time to talk about this further development of wood markets summary. I might suggest that you not do that in its place. Think about where you want to go from here, what the next step is that might be helpful to do, the work that might be helpful to do between now and next meeting to perhaps explore this RFP issue a little bit more depth. So would anybody be opposed to scrapping the further developing wood markets agenda item?
This is Barry. I guess I would be opposed to scrapping that, especially because I was part of the group that developed the recommendations that you sent out to everybody. So I think it's a topic worthy of discussion for the group.
Okay. Then why don't we move on, take the open space program, and then we'll see where we're at the end of the meeting as to what the next steps will be. So let me give it over to you, Mark.
Okay, thanks, Jody. And thanks to Tom, Doak, and Alec for the conversations we had earlier and over email, trying to pull some of this together for the larger group's consideration. I don't want to read these 2 pages to you, so I'll just note that we were considering ways that the open space program could be updated and revised to be accessible and attractive to more forest landowners and provide a greater climate benefit through forest carbon. And that was the origin of this effort. We also very much agreed that this was not a final proposal that was ready for prime time. This was a set of ideas for further consideration, and that the group that we have in our task force is not a complete or sufficient group to weigh in on a revision to the open space program. As has been pointed out earlier, we will need input from municipal voices, in particular, probably through the Maine Municipal Association, and probably other state agency voices from Maine Revenue and other stakeholders as well. I think I would actually leave it there, other than also highlighting that this wasn't even a consensus recommendation among the 3 of us. We had a sort of limited effort to pull some thoughts together in a timely manner for this group.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, and those that you worked with, Tom and Alec in particular. So reactions from anyone else who, or actually, please, Tom and Alec, feel free to weigh in as well, but want to just get reactions to the direction that this suggests moving in, and if you like it or you don't. Tom, go ahead.
Just to add a couple more things. One of the we were trying to figure out also how not to really disrupt the program for people that are already in it. And I believe the vast majority of the people that are in it are using the current open space deduction, which is 30%, and public access is 25%. And if you leave those the same, then you're not impacting every single person in the open space program. Part of this is, how do you do this if you're going to change open space? How do you do it and not completely alter things for folks? So I think that may be an important part going forward, to trying to at least not change it so much that it affects everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the ideas about adding wildlife and a carbon component. Well, Mark is right. I don't think we have an agreement. Nobody's agreeing exactly what that ought to be, but those are pieces that I think are worth more conversation.
Great, thank you. Other reactions? Karen, go ahead.
Thanks for a good first draft here of some good thoughts. Are there any concerns from anyone regarding the transfer from property from tree growth to open space? Just testing that concept. For my own understanding. And then also I did note reference to, obviously the importance of meeting with a group from the assessors, but also any funding ideas or is there much opportunity to talk about that, or helping communities if there's a large participation in this program?
I guess I would say that we did have some conversation among us, and Patrick certainly join in, because we'd had prior conversations around that potential element as well, not following our last meeting of this task force, but going back some months. With regard to the budgetary consideration, financial consideration, Tom Doak, I think, did a good job of highlighting that there is a complicated analysis here for municipalities, that they see some benefit from reduced infrastructure needs and reduced impacts on their budget from the costs of infrastructure and services from lands that stay undeveloped or in open space. But open space, and it therefore changes their valuation formula, but it doesn't have the same reimbursement structure that tree growth does.
Other reactions to this draft?
This is Barry. I guess I'd say that, to me, that the whole thing with open space is kind of a narrow focus on an aspect of what is a much bigger, the bigger charge that we're working on. And I think we could be perhaps putting too much undue emphasis on that, because it's easy, and or it's not easy, but it's straightforward. You can kind of wrap your mind around it, as opposed to the whole big picture of what we're trying to do, which is to increase carbon storage in our forests. So I would encourage us to not get too focused on this to the detriment of all the other things that we're thinking about. For example, like, the forest markets is one thing. And also, I think there will be quite a bit of pushback from municipalities about this. Like, for example, now I'm digging into the details after saying that they weren't, that they shouldn't be the focus. But if, with the numbers in the document, a landowner could easily come up with a 95% reduction in their valuation under this program. So I can see a lot of landowners, for example, in tree growth, saying, well, I can just leave this program and leave tree growth and not have the obligation for producing commercial forest products. So I could see a lot of people leaving tree growth because of this. Now, I talk with landowners a lot about the various different tax programs and what works and what doesn't. And usually I tell people, well, you can leave tree growth and transfer to another program, but your taxes will probably be higher. So there's a lot of nuances to this that I don't know that we really need to get into today, but I do see it as a bit not really directly addressing the program that we're supposed to, addressing the problem that we're supposed to be addressing.
Well, let me just clarify one point, that it is explicitly stated in the executive order that this task force will recommend updates to the open space current use taxation program, including in a manner that incentivizes climate-friendly land management practices. And what the executive order does not do, unfortunately, perhaps to many of you, is say, identify the, ways in which to increase markets for low-grade timber. So I think we need to, be remembering what this group has been charged to do.
Right. Yeah. Go.
Well,
I do agree. It is a bullet point, and I agree. But I'm just saying, on our list of bullet points, it's a very narrow thing compared to some of the other bullet points, which are big. And it's easy to just focus on a narrow thing and forget all these other big things.
Sure.
So
sure. I'm not sure if it was Tom Doak and then Tom Abello. Let's take you in that order. Reverse. Okay, Tom Abello.
Thanks, Jody. And thanks for the people that worked on this draft. I think it's really good. I like the direction that has been laid out here. I would agree with the municipal challenges, and I think there are ways to put further reins on this around a similar reimbursement program that is currently attached to tree growth. I think there's ways to address some of that. As I looked at this and thought about the executive order at the front end, to me, this is one tool to incentivize those landowners in those smaller categories to do more on their land. And I think, having this financial incentive for those people who are, quote unquote, trapped in tree growth or in tree growth, but forest products isn't their primary reason for owning land. This is a place where they can more focus on those carbon friendly and wildlife programs with that incentive. So to me, that's a really good idea as well. And then when we think about funding from the state long term, I think that's a really tough nut, and it's tough to think about what role the state can play financially to landowners over the long term outside of tax incentives like tree growth, like the open space program. I think those are really challenging, and I think because the state budgets fluctuate every couple years, it's hard to plan in the long term. And so as this executive order was coming together, and as we talked about it in the Natural and Working Lands group, I think the conversation was, here's a spot where we can plan long-term or have a long-term option for those landowners that are seeking something different than the tree growth program.
Thank you. Tom Doak and then Patrick.
I think there is a carbon possibility benefit on open space, but I also think, we started out with the biggest, we want to keep woodland undeveloped. And to me, if we can get more people interested in a current use taxation program and make open space somewhat attractive to people, not necessarily for people that wholesale transfer from tree growth. I don't think we want to do that, but let's get more people into open space, because if you ask landowners what their biggest concern is, property taxes are way up at the top of trying to keep their land intact. So if you can get people in open space, you're actually doing another thing that we're trying to do, which is keep land as wooded or undeveloped land. The transfer, the recommendation, I've tried a couple times in the legislature to get automatic transfer through. And the whole idea is just to take, to allow those people to get out if they don't want to be in at tree growth, but to get them to open space. And the other thing, and I don't think we should assume that just because someone's in open space, they're not going to cut trees. That just may be a better fit for them, but we can change the percentages so that we don't, discourage management, but we can probably encourage management while still being in open space.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Patrick, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with what Tom just said. The way I look at this exercise is we have to run the numbers, because I'm not interested in a great exodus out of the tree growth program. That's an important program, and it gives us some real stability in the industry. But if we look at open space as a way to get people interested in their woodlands for a variety of reasons, and still create enough of a differential that if they want to have further reductions, they can consider moving into tree growth. That would be a good policy kind of direction. And that's how I go about thinking about open space. So I don't want to create a program. So it ought to be integrated in a way to those that can veer off into tree growth and get an even greater incentive. That would be the way I'd try and structure it as a matter of policy for the state.
Great. All right. So let me just suggest then that it sounds like what the subgroup was recommending, that a next step would be to have a smaller group discuss these issues with representatives from MMA, Maine Revenue Services. I'm assuming the state assessors organization as well, but I'm a little unclear about that. I think that was a recommendation, Don, from you some time ago. So let me just clarify the who first. Mark, was there a conversation about the assessors organization?
I actually don't know that we felt we had complete expertise to say who should be included. We were just acknowledging those perspectives that we didn't have.
Okay. And Don, do you feel like you know more about this?
Well, you you've talked to the MMA, they represent the municipalities. The MAAO represents the assessors, and they're the ones who are going to apply the sniff test to all of this, because they're going to be asking you, how's this going to work? How do I deal with this?
Yeah. And we were thinking about ways that this gets easier to administer as we were trying to envision changes.
So one thought would be that we keep this subgroup intact. It's not a permanent obligation. So Mark, Tom, Alec, if you don't want to be on it, you can let me know, but that we have some subgroup that reaches out to representatives from those 3 organizations and see if we can have a meeting between now and your next meeting to get some initial feedback about this concept, and then report back on what that feedback is at your next meeting. What do you think of that?
I guess I would say it would be helpful to have someone from the state in this group in that meeting, rather than us going to Maine Revenue without someone from the state that's been a part of this task force. So whether that's Tom or Amanda, I think it'd be helpful to have that participation.
Okay.
But
Then why don't Tom and Amanda, you and I talk about that on Monday, of just sort of how to move forward with this much guidance? How does that sound?
yeah, that's fine.
Yep, that sounds good.
Okay, so let's pivot. Thank you so much, Mark, Tom, Alec, Patrick. And then we'll move on to Adam, if you want to say a few words about the next 2 pages. 2, 3, 2 pages 13.
There's 2, and sure, I can, like Mark, I can be quick in the sense that everyone can read. This is building off discussion that Dana, Alec, Barry, and I had, just flowing from conversation that we had the last meeting, which is really to just acknowledge that, we keep talking a lot about silviculture and management and other aspects, and keeping forests as forests, and sort of just recognizing that another incentive to keep forests as forests is to actually have markets and have forests be profitable, such that you can actually want to do something on your land that you can use to pay your taxes and things like that, right? And as we know that for several years now, the particularly the lower grade markets have been not nearly as robust as they've been historically, which is leading to sort of transition to a lot of the way how forests being managed, and how along the supply chain things are being affected. But really sort of centered around that, and said, let's at least acknowledge this. A lot of literature does point out that going in and cutting trees and doing things in the woods is actually good for forest biomass, forest health, forest carbon, right? And so it's just basically raising that awareness and thinking about just broadly, what can we do to help basically, get more activity in the woods that helps meet these multiple objectives. Beyond that, we then sort of built off some other examples. There we use some great sort of knowledge that Dana had with sort of different companies that he even alluded to a little bit earlier today, just about certification and utilization of certification and things, and how that's driving demand to some degree. And then I also brought in some work from a recent survey that we've done across sort of the Northeast to say, it's not really the type of thinking that we're coming up with is not just the 4 of us. There's 300 plus loggers and foresters and landowners that basically very much think along those same lines. But we also recognize that this group is not the one that should be necessarily leading the charge and saying, let's create all these new markets, right? There's a lot of other effort that's going on throughout the state with the 4 Maine initiative that we've talked about, a lot of work up at University of Maine about creating new products and how do we disseminate that, et cetera, right? But it's, again, the value add that we bring is that we're also looking at not just purely from a products lens and a sort of forest products perspective, but also, how can we bring the aspect of carbon and the value of carbon into that sort of domain, right? And acknowledge, are there win-win situations, or can we use the sort of notion of the value of carbon and how that could supplement some of the needs that are existing on the ground and in markets right now to help prop that up and get that aspect moving even more. And I'll at least leave it at that from my perspective. Others might want to, from the group might want to weigh in if I missed anything important.
Yeah, so it was Barry, Dana, Alec, were those the three? Okay, yeah, from any of you, would you like to add to what Adam said? Yeah, Alec, go ahead.
This issue is fundamentally important if we want to improve silviculture in the Maine woods. I agree that it's not sufficient in and of itself with Mark Berry's comment, but if we don't have markets for small diameter and low value wood, essentially you're making many of the things that could be done to increase the growth of our forests, both in terms of quantity of material over time, larger material over time, and better quality material. You're making it something that costs money rather than produces money. So this is really, in my view, fundamentally important to the success of the efforts to improve silviculture in the state of Maine. There are millions of acres of stands that need thinning, which in the current financial situation will not get it unless we provide a market for that wood.
So I think that there, it's going to sound critical, and I don't mean it this way, Alec. I suspect that this whole group knows this, and then the question is, what can this group be doing that isn't currently being done to support that goal?
This
Barry.
is Barry.
Oh, sorry. Let me let Alec and then Barry. Sorry.
So we haven't dug down to that level of detail because if this whole group agrees with this up front, then that's where we need to go next. And we haven't gone there because we produced this high level statement about the need for this.
Okay, thank you. Barry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one thing this group can do, and we're already doing it, is acknowledging the importance and the depth of it. And Adam and Alec both expressed it very well. But I think just the thing we can do is to acknowledge it and keep it right in the forefront. And along those lines, I appreciate and I'm glad you put it at the top of page 4 in the beginning of your draft elements, right along with keeping forest land as forest land and not developed land. I think they're both primary, and I'm glad they're at the top spot there, and I think it should stay there. And us putting it there is something that we can do because that will keep it in the forefront for others as well.
Thank you. Dana, go ahead, and then Karen.
Yeah, just in response to your question, Jody, I think as part of this process, what I saw as part of this process was trying to take a more global perspective. And, I had thrown out to the group, and it's in what Adam just summarized, what is driving certain companies' perspectives on their wood procurement and an incentive program in Michigan that's been put in place. And it drove development of a brand new facility there by Aruco. And, we're having conversations about open space. So is one of the suggestions in open space that it effectively becomes a current use program, and all the content that comes off of that, out of that program, with the folks who join that program, have an opportunity to sell their wood as 100% FSC. I think those are the ideas, that there's cross-pollination now, that we need to think a little bit more globally through this process, that not only can we increase carbon sequestration, but we can also create markets by having more out-of-the-box thinking in terms of our policy development. That's the way I look at it.
Great, thank you. Any other comments on this Yeah, sorry, Karen, forgot.
Well, I think many of you were involved in, some of you were actually on the Climate Council itself, Commissioner Beal and Patrick and others, Ivan. And I know that that report acknowledges the importance of the forest industry, and there's this huge effort in the Maine to also be creating markets and businesses for the lower grade products. What just came to me as I was listening was if we had a program, maybe we go to an RFP and an existing entity, basically provides a program, maybe one of the payments to a landowner not only might be money, but it could be an assured buyer of the, let's say the thinnings. In other words, that they have an assured buyer could be the incentive. So I think that there is some cross-pollination here with all these other parts of the Climate Council's work and the Maine and this. So maybe just strengthening that, and maybe just by doing that, we'll come up with more discrete things that we could do in this group.
Right.
Anyway, thank you for the hard work on that.
Patrick.
No, it's a great effort, and Karen's thoughts are appreciated too. I think this is really what we've been all about, is trying to figure out in the Maine project, what are the next wave of materials coming that are going to be available to us and what's happening globally. So as we speak, we are working with DECD, a global consulting company, and Maine and Company in bringing in people to look at Maine and see what kind of interest they have in setting down roots and in manufacturing of all types of services. So there is some synergy with the Maine project, and maybe I could get you some more information on that, so everybody's at the same point in terms of understanding what's happening there. We have a lot of experience in certification. There's reasons why it's easy to go FSC in some states when most of the land is state owned, and when we do certification in Maine with the paper mills, that was a priority. Given the private ownership, we could probably get up to 40% content being certified. So that doesn't mean we don't look at these things, but there's some interesting things that make us different too in Maine as compared to other states. But I appreciate the effort of the group, and they're on track in the way that they're thinking. Thanks.
Thank you. Let me ask the public for a show of hands of folks who would like to make a public comment right now. And I think we're going to switch to that and then come back to a quick review of the executive order. So any public comments? And that is, why am I not finding that person? Patty Cormier, you go right ahead. Why don't we take your comment?
Hey, everybody. Good to see everyone. So if it's okay, I'd like to make some comments on a few of the topics you've been talking about. Okay. One comment was earlier in the discussion talking about, I guess, capacity and the Forest Service's role. And just wanted to give a number out there, food for thought, that in the early 2000s, it was right after the ice storm. And due to a lot of funding, 4,000 plans were put out through the Forest Service, cost share plans, representing 500,000 acres. And at this point, we are down to 1,000 plans and 100,000 acres. So I just wanted to make the point that we can move the needle it is possible with boots on the ground, and then that is all additive. Those, we're doing 1,000 plans now average, and with 4,000 plans, look at the contact that was happening, look at the foresters, look at the loggers, look at the industry that was affected. So I just wanted you guys to hear that number. And then the talk on open space and the efforts towards that, just that I'm not sure if it was said that, just to make the point that in tree growth, there are requirements for management on the woodlands, where in open space, there isn't necessarily those requirements. So, I get what Tom is saying about, getting people in the door possibly with open space, but certainly to keep in mind that this is about encouraging woodlot owners to manage, and the whole values in that, and the tree growth does require that. And then just a comment about with Karen talking about Maine, that it's important that, as Pat said, there is synergy with what Maine is doing, and that the atmosphere for investment is very competitive. There, for business to come into the state, they're looking at other states, Washington, Oregon, Minnesota. So it's very competitive, and that it's just imperative that we're working with DECD and other groups to maintain that business climate that gets those markets into Maine. And that's all I had.
Patty, do you happen to know the number of foresters at Maine Forest Service in the early 2000s, when you were putting out 4,000 plants that covered 500,000 acres, compared to what it is now?
Not offhand, but that's an easy number to get you.
Yeah, I'd be interested. I think this group, it would be helpful for this group to know what it was compared to what it is now.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other public comments? Okay. All right, then if we could just quickly pivot to the second page of the executive order. I'm looking at a, can't give you the page number in the packet, this page 17, I think it is. And
Jody,
just
Jody,
please.
excuse me, could I just quickly respond to what Patty said about the foresters and the ice storm plans?
Sure.
Because I was working back as a forester back in those olden days. At that point, the ice storm plans are mostly done by consultants. The Forest Service in around 2000 had 16 service foresters, but it was 2001 they got cut back to 10 district foresters, which is basically my understanding what they have now. But most of those plans were done by consultants, but I believe there was federal money that came in to help pay for all of those.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, if you could turn to page 17 for a moment, and I just want to have you think about areas that have gotten insufficient attention to date of this A through I. I think Dana has pointed out one in particular. If you look at E, this identification of incentives for high quality on the ground performance by loggers and promoting the use of low impact harvest equipment, and wanted to get your thoughts on how this group might think about addressing that particular issue.
Jody, do you mind if I just jump in?
Please.
Yeah, so obviously I identified it and it's on the list. This came out of our working lands discussion where we spent a lot of time, and obviously I promoted some type of recognition of third-party certification for logging company performance as a conduit for any activity in carbon markets. I mean, it's a verification opportunity that I think is there in the future. And then, I can get into further detail as to what I presented to the Working Lands group. And then we also talked about, as we move forward with wanting to have more low impact harvesting equipment that's out there that is more ground sensitive, less ground impact, etc. That comes at a cost, and harvesting equipment gets more costly every year. So one of the initiatives that I had mentioned back in the Working Lands group was the direct link loan program that's administered by Maine DEP, the Bond Bank, and the Forest Service, because of its opportunity to lower the financing rates. And it's still a great program. There's just not enough money in it because it gets utilized early every year because of how expensive harvesting equipment is. I will also just mention that that program is not having an impact right now because interest rates are so low. So banks aren't able to lower their rates even further with the use of that program. So it's kind of at a standstill. So I'll just throw both of those pieces out there as a starting point.
Others' thoughts on how you'd like to think about addressing this? Alec, go ahead.
Obviously, having a logging force which is capable of doing the job and doing it in the way that is going to be climate beneficial is essential. So I would suggest that we need to put some more time and attention into the issue that Dana is raising.
Sure hope somebody else heard that, because I'm sorry, my interruption. I will listen to the video on that one. Sorry, Alec. Could we just quickly review the rest of, just do a scan of the rest of the A through I, and also, oh, Karen, please go ahead.
Well, it was really to your question that you were asking. I wasn't sure when to just point out that. I don't know that I recall us talking about opportunities for Maine to participate in multi-state forest carbon initiatives. And I sort of recall that Tom Abello, you had mentioned that there was some outreach to that on that topic, but as a group, I don't know that we've really talked about that. And I'd be very curious about any ideas that might be emerging from those discussions. And then G is sort of interesting, I guess is the best way to put it, because I know some of you, and Pat Strauch, I'm particularly mentioning noting your concern that we not like expand beyond our 10 to 10,000 focus, but here we have G, exploring partnerships. And I guess what comes to my mind there is, are there larger commercial forest land owners who are involved in some kind of carbon program that could sweep in some smaller ones? I just don't know. So I'm not sure what G really is going to, but I'm noting that G and H are one areas that we haven't talked much about.
Yeah, Tom, would you like, I can speak at a very high level about H, and just note that we definitely will have on the agenda for the next meeting a presentation on that, whether it's bringing somebody in from the U.S. Climate Alliance or not, I'm not clear about yet, but there definitely have been some initial conversations happening between states at the staff level. And I do think that that work is going to ramp up over the course of the next many months. And so it will be important for this group to not only know what's going on, but to have opportunities to weigh into that effort as well. So that will definitely be on next month's agenda. Okay. All right, so with just a few minutes remaining, we spoke about, oh, sorry.
Jody?
Karen.
I'm
Yep,
so sorry. May I mention one other thing?
please.
A number of folks were a little curious, I think, to hear more from Alec about the RFP. I think we
Yes.
have time to see the slides and talk about it, but maybe there could be a presentation of a more refined sense of what that idea might look like at the next meeting.
Precisely, absolutely. And that's where we were headed next, is just thinking about what we want to make sure is on the agenda for the next meeting. So let me just talk about calendar for a moment. There is the possibility that the meeting on August 27th may need to be moved to the 20th, and we will know that within the next week. But if you were able to pencil in the 20th, if you had it available, and email me if you know that you won't be available on the 20th. So that one is in flux. Relative to the length of the future meetings, we've got just 3 meetings remaining, and I'm going to suggest that you move those to 3-hour meetings instead of 2, if you feel like you can commit that amount of time. And so maybe if I could hear from anybody who has concerns about that, it might be most efficient.
Also, a quick clarification, would that be moving them from 9 to 12?
Yes. Yes, actually, I'm making an assumption there that with the legislature, yeah, how does that work, Tom and Amanda? Does that make sense to you, 9 to 12?
Yeah, I mean, by the time July rolls around, fingers crossed, the session will be over. So that's fine.
Yeah, so if it was 9 to 12 for the final 3 meetings, any major concerns about that? Okay. All right, I'll get back to you as soon as possible about August 27th versus August 20th. Definitely a presentation on the regional conversations thus far. Definitely, I will follow up with you, Alec, about, I think, putting together a slide deck. And I think what I'm wondering is whether it could be helpful to have a few people working with Alec between now and the next meeting. I look at the subgroup that dealt with, that was talking about markets for low grade timber to be not continuing. I think of the subgroup for open space as continuing. And so wondering if there may be some volunteers who could work with Alex to flesh out this idea a little bit further on the concept of an RFP that would complement some of the other things in the 3-page project summary. Karen, thank you. Anyone else? And Barry. Okay, that would be great. And then there'd be a presentation on open space, hopefully with more information. And I think we should be having Adam kind of a standing presentation or update on the work that Logan will be doing. So why don't you just assume that for each meeting? Anything that I've forgotten? Okay. Karen.
Just Adam, would you be able to share that summary of those email exchanges?
I added it to the chat, so
okay,
someone can screen from the like the actual calculations and everything. So it's somewhere in the chat.
Okay.
And great. Patrick, go right ahead.
Just Jody, process-wise, so we're going to envision a report at some point.
Great question. We're going to envision something written. It's going to be concise because that's how I write. And yes, by September 1st. Come hell or high water.
Should I be commenting on things you write now or wait till we get further down the road? What's most helpful to you?
You should be on the ball every moment. You should be giving me comments whenever you have them.
All right, all right.
The sooner the better, because no, honestly, the sooner the better, because what I don't like, I'll be completely candid, is somebody sort of derailing the process at the 11th and a
Yeah.
half hour. So the sooner the better.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, 12:01. Thank you all. Have a great weekend.